Now, 20,000 children are said to have been illegally taken to Russia since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, a new opera tells the stories of the mothers who've travelled to Russia in the hope of bringing them home. For its first performance in Kyiv, the mothers upon whom the story is based were in the audience, and some are still to be reunited with their children. Keri-Lynn Wilson is the conductor of the opera and the founder of the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra, and she joins me now. Good afternoon, Keri-Lynn.
Good afternoon.
I want to ask you about the day of the dress rehearsal, because you met the First Lady of Ukraine, with whom you've worked a lot, but she was also joined by her husband, wasn't she? And that was a bit unexpected, was it?
Yes, it was an intense day. In fact, it was the day of the performance and dress rehearsal all together, and in the morning, because it was the International Day of Remembering Children who had been killed by Russians or in the war. This was a very special day for everyone in Ukraine. It started with a ceremony just with diplomats and the President and the First Lady at a ceremony, a memorial for children, and there were mothers there who had had their families killed, followed by this meeting with Elena Zelenska in her office with my husband and I. He's of course, the general manager of the Metropolitan Opera, who commissioned a Ukrainian composer, Maxim Kolomyets, to write an opera that would tell a story about what is happening in Ukraine, about the war. This idea came up through a librettist, George Brandt, doing research through Save Ukraine, which is an organization which is actively trying to rescue these tens of thousands of children. The story is based on these mothers from Kherson who heroically attempt to rescue their abducted and kidnapped children from the Russians by traveling, because the bridges to Crimea, where the camps are that their children were taken to as a summer camp, they agreed to. The bridges were destroyed, so they had to take this incredibly heroic, terrible journey through the border over to Poland, up into Belarus, over through Russia, and then down in Crimea, 3,000 kilometers.
I mean, it came at such personal risk to them, didn't it? So, and some of those mothers were in the audience on that for that performance in Kyiv that we're talking about. What was that like? The atmosphere there? Well,
there was so much emotion, because we knew that having children in the audience who had been rescued, having mothers in the audience some of whom had not succeeded in rescuing their children, it was we were all very much anticipating an emotional, traumatic journey, but at the same time, this was a very important event. First of all, I have to explain that this opera will have its world premiere in Warsaw in the fall, followed by the season after at the Metropolitan Opera. It was a co-commission. But we had the idea with the First Lady of Ukraine to do something ahead of this world premiere, something in Kyiv, for Ukrainians to know that we are telling their story, that this story will be told around the world, that has much more impact than a news story can, because it's artistic testimony to one of the greatest horrors of the war. So at the performance, these women were sobbing, but not because of the trauma. They were sobbing because they felt their voices were being heard.
Wow, that's extraordinary. And so tears of happiness, really, in such a sort of terribly tragic context. Just finally and briefly, if you would, it is an unconventional subject, perhaps, for an opera. Are you confident that it will draw the crowds when it travels across Europe?
I have no doubt. Because, first of all, this opera has great music. It has great emotional connection, the story itself. And I think that the Western world wants to reach out and support in any way they can those who really believe in truth and freedom. And likewise, with the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra this summer, we're on one of our performances will be at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And we'll be performing Verdi's Requiem for our 5th anniversary of the orchestra. It's a very special event to celebrate, and also to mourn for those who've lost their lives.
Indeed. Well, it sounds like an extraordinary emotional performance that it's going to be. So thank you very much for taking us through that. Keri-Lynn Wilson, thank you very much.